In today's video, we are going to be working on what's called the Shoofly block. It is another one of our lovely scrap quilt blocks that we are doing and working through in this book here. This is a book I got on clearance. I am not sponsored by it at all. I just think that it's very easy to learn from, and I've been using it and going through a bunch of the blocks. Today, we're going to learn how to make the basic block, and then we're going to make a variation with a little bit of a twist on it, because around here we like to jazz it up, matazz it up, and give it a little bit of a spin. Grab your sewing gear, let's get to it, and we will learn how to make this lovely block. Also, another little side note, if you hear some extra noises, it's laundry day, and also everybody in the neighborhood has decided to mow their grass. So if you hear some extra noises, I do apologize about that. I will do my best to try to block that out, but it is what it is. That's how life goes. But anyway, on to the video. Okay, so today's block, like I said before, is called the Shoofly block. I'm sure there's probably about 18 different other names for this block, but in this book, that's what it's called, and this is what it looks like. So what we're going to do is, first off, we're going to make the basic block the way that the book has it, and then we're going to show a couple of different ways that you can do it to give it a little jazz. First off, we're going to start with 4 larger squares that are going to turn into half square triangles for a block. They need to be a little bit bigger because we're going to be cutting and sewing into some seam allowance than our smaller squares, which are 3 inches. On those, you're going to need 5 of those. One's going to be your center square, and then the other ones are going to be around that. So you'll need 5 of those, and then you will eventually need 4 half square triangles. So what we're going to do is we're going to make those first with our 4 larger squares. I'm going to take these 2 patterns, put them pretty sides together, and then I'm going to draw a diagonal right down the middle of the block. I'm going to do the same thing on the other 2, and this diagonal is going to be a guideline for us to sew a 1/4 inch from each side of that line. Now, when I make my diagonals, I like to use a pen that can be erased by heat, but you don't necessarily have to, because this is going to be a cut line once you get done sewing, but it's just something that I like to do, and it was handy, so. Now, once you got that line drawn, you're going to go to your machine and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch on either side of that line. Now, once you get done sewing on a 1/4 inch of each side of that line, you're going to cut them on that diagonal line that you drew earlier, and that was going to leave you with 4 half square triangles. And now these are going to be in the corners of our block once we get everything constructed. And of course, you should probably press them at this point. On this block, I decided to just do a little bit of finger pressing until the very end, just because, I don't know. I know in my previous videos, I'm trying to get better with the iron, but on this, I was like, we're just going to do a little bit of a finger press because that's the kind of day that I was having when I recorded, but hey, it is what it is. So once you get those pressed, finger pressed or iron pressed, however which way that you want to go, what we'll need to do is we will need to trim our half square triangles to be the same size as our small squares. And the small squares that I'm using, because these are what I had in my stash, are actually 3-inch squares. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and trim those half square triangles to be the same size. So just go ahead and get whatever ruler that you've got. I'm using my smallest square ruler because it's also very handy, and my rotary cutter, and just trimming off the little dog ears on the sides. Turns out that the squares, since I made them 3.5 when I started, they ended up very, very close to 3 inches when I got done sewing, so that was pretty convenient. But you'll just go ahead and trim those out and make sure that they are the same size. And once you get that done, we'll be ready to construct our block and get everything laid out the way that we want to sew it. The lint roller is probably one of my best tools that I have on my sewing desk. I keep it very close. But I always have to refer back to my book to make sure that I'm laying everything out correctly. Got my book out, and I got my middle square, which was this purple one. And I laid out my half square triangles the way that I wanted those to be. Decided that I wanted the same print on like diagonal from each other. I actually set it one way, and then I was like, we're gonna do it this way. I do a lot of rearranging when it comes to blocks because I'm like, oh, does this look good? Does that look good? That's part of the fun of it to me, but yeah, just lay out your half square triangles the way that you want to have those sewn, and then you will put your other squares wherever you would like those. And I always try to have it to where there's not the same pattern touching. And it's another one of those things to where I did rotate things around, and I'm like, oh, do I want to do it like this? Do I want to do it like that? I eventually did make a decision and decide on this orientation, and that is what I was going to roll with. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and start sewing our columns together. So what I do is I take this one piece out of the second column and put it on the first piece and give it a little clip, because clips are the best. Yes, they are. Pins do have their heyday, but clips are far more likely to get used in Festina land than a pin. Take that to the machine, and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance on that line right there. Once you get back to your cutting mat, your sewing table, or whatever that you're using, you're going to go ahead and give that another finger press open, and we're going to take that third column and put all of our pieces together, and then we're going to clip and sew another 1/4 inch seam allowance. And because you chain piece those other ones, they're all connected so that nothing falls apart, and you can keep up with what pieces go where. That's another thing that can get confusing, especially if you're making larger quilt blocks, is making sure that your pieces are, 1, the right orientation, and 2, in the right spot. On this, we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance down this row, just like before. Okay, so now once we get done with all of those seams, now is the time to bust out the iron and to get our seams pressed. We're going to press our seams in opposite directions so that we can nest them and try to get the best outcome on our intersections. So I'm actually using my big iron on this project. My little iron was somewhere else, and I was actually doing some other projects, so I decided to get the big boy out. I don't use it that often, but when I need extra hot heat, it definitely does the job. Each row is going to get pressed in opposite directions so that we can get all those intersections nested. and I will show a close-up of what this looks like in just a second. And here we're going to nest those seams, and we're going to make sure that where they come together, that you can get it nice and tight, and make sure that everything is lined up. Now, this is something that I am working on getting better and better with. You also want to take your time. Don't rush through these projects if you're super particular about your intersected seams, but anyway, it's a process to get better, and it's working. I feel like mine are getting better. Even though right here, I got a little fast with sewing that, and I had to unpick it so that it would lay correctly. So what I did was I got the seam ripper out, and I unpicked a few stitches so that that little intersection would lay correctly, and I took it back to the machine, fixed it, and then brought it back. So just a little thing to watch out for if that happens, but no harm, no foul. That's what tools are for. Isn't that right? But now you're going to go and you're going to press all of these seams down. You can press them open if you like, just a personal preference. Now, if you were using this for a quilt, you may actually want to press them open so that you don't have as much bulk in there. But for demonstration purposes, I'm going to be ironing them and pressing them to the side. So this is our completed Shoofly block, and this is how it looks in the book. But of course, because you're in Festina land, what we're going to do is we're going to give it a little bit of a variation. And now you can see where the seams come together. I did pretty good. I think there was one that was a little bit wonky, but it's not a big deal to me. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do another variation of this very easy block, and we are going to do a little bit of slicing and dicing. First off, I was going to do a cut down the diagonal and see how that looked, but I didn't particularly like how the seams were going to sit, so I decided to go down the middle long ways and across instead of the diagonal. So what I did was I measured what my squares were currently, and I just took my rotary cutter and sliced right down the middle. Now, it's always a scary thing when you've got a quilt block that you've done and you start slicing and dicing, but it's one of those things you never know what's going to happen unless you try. So I was like, hey, I'm going to go with it. I'm going to try it. So what I did was I was going to do something like this, and I was like, you know what? Let's try something a little bit extra. So I went and did a cut right down the middle on the other side to see how it would look. Again, this is not anything that I've really seen before. This is just me taking some knowledge from a previous block and putting it on this. So let's go ahead and slice that down the middle. And now we've got our 4 little pieces, just like this. And now you have a little bit of freedom to where you can take these pieces and you can flip them around. So, of course, what do I have to do? I've got to flip this one and flip another one and see how it looks. And I ended up deciding to do it like this because I liked the purple on the corners and the purple in the middle. So I decided to roll with this. So now what are we going to do? Our same process as before. We're going to take these 2, sew those together, take the bottom 2, sew those together, and then we're going to put the rows together. And now you have a completely different looking block than you did before, and it's super simple because you're not doing that much sewing. You're just sewing and cutting. That's what all of quilt making basically is. But here we've got our 2 rows, and of course I had to remember how I did it because this was another day when I started recording the end part. So I had to go back to it and remember what in the world I did before. But all I had to do was just look at a quick picture on my phone, and there you go. But now there's your end result of your Shoofly block with a little bit of a variation. So the final finished size of this block is going to be 7 inches square. So take that into account. You can actually scale this block to be any size that you like, but if you wanted it to be larger at the end, just make sure that your beginning squares are going to be scaled up from where I started. But here is a fun block that you can use on all of your projects, and I hope that you enjoyed learning the Shoofly block and variation. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love for you to subscribe, like it, share it, and I hope to see you next time.